So why people switch to Linux from Windows in 2019 and 2020? I believe that Linux, and especially Linux Mint in particular, is a perfect place for newcomers from Windows. Why do I mean this? When I tried Linux, and that was around 2003 and 4, I was really curious about this strange world where you had opportunity to install peculiar but also totally free and gratis open source software. I really wanted to switch from Windows at the time, but the reality hit me in the head. At the time, I was really dependent on proprietary software as Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere Pro, and whatnot. Secondly, I didn't want to abandon all my games that waited for me in Windows. But I want to talk about now, today. I am one of the new Linux users as I switched in late August to Linux Mint. I'm sure that people back in the day switched to Linux for ideological or even technical reasons. My drive to switch was often ideological, but I didn't switch to Linux for technical reasons, which was the lack of apps and games. But a lot of things change since then. I believe that people switched to Linux Mint in particular in 2019 and probably 2020. It's because of the following reasons. Number one, users detest and reject Microsoft data mining. This is especially true for me. This is probably the most important reason why I switched to Linux. I was simply fed up with all the data mining and online surveillance by Microsoft and all the other culprits that are using Windows users' data for commercial purposes. So I switched to Linux Mint to avoid all of this. And this is also what I think that many people who switch to Linux are doing it because of the lack of security and privacy in Windows, especially Windows 10. Reason number two, they don't want bloatware. And I mean bloatware, a lot of bloatware. Just take a look at the typical Windows 10 desktop. There's a lot of, like My Office, OneNote, Minecraft, Microsoft Solitaire Collection, some Mickey Mouse games probably, or app, Xbox, a lot of these games, of course, like Candy Crush, Soda Sega. And even if you remove these apps, you will most likely get them in the next Windows update. This is what really bothers me and probably a lot of other Windows users who decide to get something else. Number three, users like gaming. And of course, the best platform for gaming is still Windows. And believe me, I know what I'm talking about. I've been Windows user for almost 30 years and I was an avid gamer, and games just usually work in Windows. You don't have to tweak a lot. Sometimes there are some problems with certain files or whatever, but usually games just work in Windows. In Linux, it's a different story. Just a couple of years ago, gaming was not a big thing in Linux, at least not for the usual and especially non-technical Linux user. But a lot have changed a couple of years ago when Valve made a Steam client for Linux and began on developing Proton. And then we have other projects in Linux world, such as Playing on Linux and Lutris. So a lot of things changed gaming world, and especially in Linux. So it is possible to play a lot of games now in Linux. Let's take a look at my Steam account. As you can see, all these games are the ones I played in Windows. All these games. I made a category inside my Steam library and I called it Linux. And it means all these games that I tried and played in Linux. This way I wanna document which games are working in Steam. So for the past 3 months I installed and successfully played these games like Arma 3, Cities Skylines, one of my favorites, Everspace, Football Manager 2015, Ghost Story, Infested Planet, Insurgency, Life is Strange, Before the Storm, Operation Flashpoint, Dragon Rising, Prison Architect, Spec Ops The Line, The Swapper, and Tomb Raider. And of course, not all of these games are native to Linux, but some are. I know for a fact that Cities Skylines is native to Linux. Everspace, I think, is too. Ghost Story is a Linux native game. Insurgency, I believe, I'm not totally sure. Life is Strange, Before the Storm is a native game to Linux. Prison Architect, I'm not sure about Spec Ops. The Swapper is a native game, I believe, too, and so is Tomb Raider. So many games are getting, into Linux platform, and this is great news for Linux users who want to play games. Of course, you cannot play all the games in the world in Linux, but things are changing and they are changing fast. So this is the third reason why people also like to change or use Linux. Of course, it's for the gaming purposes. Number 4 is Windows users are tired of Windows Update. And man, did I hate that Windows Update, especially when it came in a time that it was really not appropriate. Maybe I was doing some serious business, I was writing, maybe I was gaming, maybe I was talking to someone or whatever I did. Maybe I watched a YouTube video and Windows would sometimes just go ahead and do its updating thing, and sometimes also just reboot without asking. So this is really, it was always a pain in Windows. I found this article that is stating the same. Updating Windows 10 is a nightmare for home users. And it actually refers to a research paper called In Control with No Control: Perceptions and Reality of Windows 10 Home Edition Update Feature. The conclusion is that the update process on Windows 10 is still complex for many users, but also that the unexpected reboots still happen from time to time. According to the research, total of 53% out of 93 Windows 10 home users said updating Windows is much easier now in Windows 10, while 8% described the process as more difficult than before. And if you are interested in reading this paper, you can get it here. As you can see, I'm using Linux Mint, and right here I have an icon that says there is an update. If I don't press on this button, this will just stay here for a very, very, very long time. It wouldn't do anything. So if I don't want to update anything on my system, I'm allowed to do so, and it is my choice to do it or not. But if I want to update my Linux Mint system, I can just press the button and the update manager will pop up. And then I can say, what updates do I have? right here there is an Intel microcode update, a processor microcode firmware for Intel CPUs, because I'm using the one. And if I am interested, I can just press install updates, write my password, and the update will go. But hey, there's no full screen with the updates just like we have in Windows 10. No, it's just a little screen here, and I can even minimize it or not. And when it's done, it will just shut down the program, as you can see it here, and I can just go on with my work or whatever I was doing on my computer. This is what it really is, the powerful thing in Linux. The updates do not get in your way. Number 5, Linux is more secure system. And of course it is. It's just the way it is built. And also, there aren't many viruses that you find in Linux. Well, people say that's because Linux is not popular, so that's why we don't see a lot of viruses in Linux. Yeah, well, that maybe it's true, but a lot of people are using Linux. And actually, I'm not running any antivirus in my machine at the moment. Maybe it's a stupid thing, but I didn't have any problem so far. While on the other side, you can't use Windows without installing antivirus programs, anti-malware apps, and so on. This is just the first thing you need to do when installing Windows. In Linux, you don't need that. Linux is just rock solid operating system that is taking care of your security and privacy. Number 6 is more choices to personalize your Linux distribution than Windows. So there's a lot of flexibility in Linux. Of course, you can also personalize your Windows, but it needs a lot of third-party apps to do so. In Linux, and of course this is subject to the individual Linux distribution, but you can make changes to the looks of your distribution. As we can see here, themes in Linux Mint, I can change the way it looks. Window borders, I can change icons, even controls. Mint White Aqua I'm using at the moment, and I can change it to Mint White Dark. It will get all dark. So a lot of possibilities. Desktop Adapta Nocto at the moment, I can change it to Cinnamon or any of these, and even change and download a lot much more than I can see it here. So the personalization, making Linux desktop to look just the way you want, is a very powerful thing. Number 7, Linux works on older hardware. I have an old Dell Inspiron 6400 that is more than 13 years old. There is no way I can install a modern Windows OS on it. There is just no way I could get away with it. So what I'm running on it, I'm actually running a Lubuntu Linux on it, and it actually works pretty well. It is not slow. Of course, it's an ancient machine, but it is not slow, and the computer is actually quite usable with Lubuntu. And then it just gave a new life to my machine. I was actually thinking of throwing it away, but then I installed Lubuntu, and it is really, really usable machine right now, in any aspect. I have also a very old MacBook Pro. It is actually 10 years old, and I installed Linux Mint, I believe XFCE version, and it works just perfect, just like a new machine. So this is the power of Linux. It works very well on older hardware, and this is not the case for Windows operating systems or Mac OS. Number 8 reason why people want to change to Linux is that Linux has become a realistic choice as a new desktop operating system instead of Windows or Mac OS. And this actually says or incorporates all of these things I mentioned earlier. Linux has really become an alternative for computer users because it isn't just for the technical nerds as it probably was 10, 15 years ago. Linux has gone really a great way in meeting the new potential users because it isn't just for the technical computer users. And number 9, Linux is free and Linux is gratis. What do I mean by that? Linux is really free software that you can change. You are not answering to any corporation in doing that. And you can do that. You can contribute to the Linux community almost in any way you want. And it's gratis. It is free, as in money. You don't have to pay for most of Linux distributions. Debian is free to download and install. Linux Mint is free to download and install, and so is Ubuntu, so is Arch, so is Manjaro, and dozens and dozens of other Linux distributions. And this is really a thing that a lot of people are not aware. Of course, people who are not using Linux distributions. So I think that the new Linux user is not a hardcore open source software worshipper as it probably was earlier. He or she is a quite pragmatic user. They want the best from both worlds, and both worlds I mean, Windows and Linux. The new Linux users most likely want seamless Gmail integration and Microsoft integration and the Facebook access. And all these wishes can be met and are met in Linux today. That's why Linux is a new and viable possibility for new users. And these are the reasons that I believe a new Linux user is using Linux.